Here. I have Jossie here all the way from the UK. Jossie, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks for having me, Jim. It feels a big moment actually.
We were
A lot of
waiting for this
emotion.
day. Yeah,
Yeah,
this was like we talked about this day, right, throughout the journey, and here we are. So it is pretty emotional, right, to be here.
yeah. Um, so yeah, I started um, this journey back in 2023, beginning of 2023, with long COVID. I worked shift work as a resident doctor, and I contracted COVID on a set of night shifts. And carried on doing the night shifts because I didn't realize and was absolutely exhausted afterwards. And the weeks went by and I never recovered. I couldn't get back into work. I had such severe physical fatigue and brain fog being the worst symptoms. Um, and I was absolutely terrified. I'd had many friends who had long COVID themselves. I was quite late to long COVID by that point. There'd been quite a few years of other people, and a lot of people I knew weren't better. And I was absolutely terrified. And that's really where my story starts, well, superficially. But as I'm going to say, there were signs before which helped piece things together.
Yeah. Yeah, so you had the COVID. When did you get the COVID again? It's 2023 that you
Uh,
contracted it.
yeah, early 2023, and it was a very mild illness. I'd had COVID four times before. I'd had all the vaccines, so
With
nothing had ever been a problem
no
before.
problems prior. You kind of got through all those, no worries.
Yeah, absolutely no problem. The difference this time was that I was working a set of night shifts, which I found quite stressful and quite physically draining anyway. Um, and you always feel, anyone who does shift work knows, you always feel run down after them. So it was very hard to distinguish that from the virus. But the two came together, and my recovery from the night shifts was longer and longer and longer. And I started to panic that I had long COVID.
Uh,
Um,
so almost like it was like you got the COVID again, but in a parallel with this night shifts, which was stressful. And it's almost like the stress from the night shifts can attach itself to the COVID, right? You thought, oh, this is from the COVID. Is that right? You started to believe at the time that, oh my gosh, I'm having a long COVID. Is that right?
yeah, I think I started to believe that having a virus during the night shift was an extra level of extra level of stress to the body, and that could, those two things together would make my response to the virus worse, and I just became terrified that that feeling that I had for the couple of weeks while I was poorly with the virus, and recovering from night shifts would never end, and it didn't for a long period of time.
Yeah. So what? So tell the audience what happened. So you that there's so that way you're terrified. The symptoms now what were getting worse, or you were what were you experiencing?
So my experience was really, really debilitating brain fog. I felt like I wasn't in the world at all. Things were going on around me and I wasn't registering them. I felt that if I did anything more other than lying with my eyes shut, that the world would close without around me. It felt like there was a really thick layer of fuzz in between me and everything else. My hearing felt really distorted, and I just couldn't imagine how I could even get in the car to drive to work, let alone go and do my job. And it was absolutely terrifying. I couldn't concentrate on the television. It was almost painful to have any stimulus in the room. And I spent those early couple of weeks lying either in my bed or on the sofa, trying not to cry because crying was so emotionally tiring that I couldn't even express any sadness or tell people how I felt because I just didn't have the energy to do that. And
Mhm.
it was such a scary time.
Yeah, yeah, and that at that time you were still working. You were still working night shifts, or what happened at that time? Or did you shift out of work then? I can't remember.
So I took 3 weeks off work thinking it was just an initial viral period and that I'd let myself recover for 3 weeks. I didn't feel recovered in 3 weeks, but I was slightly better. And I took myself out on the weekend with my partner and walked up a small hill near to us. And actually, while I was walking up the hill, it went really well. But when I got home, I not only had the cognitive brain symptoms, but I also developed severe muscle aches and physical fatigue, which felt like every movement was so heavy and muscle aches, which I'd never had before. I tried to go back into work the following day, which is about an hour's commute away. And on the drive on the way there, I just barely even remember driving in. I made it absolutely fine. And I started the day at work, but within about an hour of being at work, I was in tears. I felt I couldn't stand up. I nearly fainted and I was sent home, which was such a huge hit
Hmm.
emotionally. And I needed to drive an hour home and I just couldn't. And I lay in a multi-story car park in the back of my car, feeling unable to drive home, but also unable to find another way of getting home on the train.
Hmm.
And I did eventually make it home, stopping every 10 to 15 minutes to just make it down the motorway home. And after that, I went to my GP and I didn't go back into work again for a year after that.
Wow. So that was a breaking point there for you.
Yeah.
And at that point, a year now, right? So let's get into this period now. What happened now? So you're off work. What was happening during this time with symptoms? And because at this point you didn't really, you thought you had long COVID, or what did you think you had at this point?
So I had enough experience of other people to know that I had long COVID. So I went to my GP and I started the medical process of getting assessed, blood tests, checking there was nothing else going on. I ended up going to the hospital one time and being told that everything was okay, but I probably had long COVID. So I did get a diagnosis very quickly, and I was referred to long COVID services. And I started looking where possible, where I had energy. I started trying to look into treatments myself. And those early weeks and months were very much researching, trying to get friends and family and this to research things on my behalf and trying different treatments and trying to come to terms with what I should be doing. But really, more than anything, it wasn't a productive time, and it was just a total emotional crash
Mhm.
of not being able to accept what had happened, not believing what had happened, and the complete terror that this could be years and years and years of my life, and a huge grief reaction. I also developed so much fear around my symptoms in this time. Like looking back now, I can completely understand and with a bit of space from time, see how fear loops were developing in my brain.
Yeah.
Um, it was I was so hypervigilant and so panicked every time a symptom was slightly worse. And I kept diaries. I wanted to tell everyone about how bad it was for me. And I just reinforced these symptoms and I became so scared and I couldn't tolerate a single symptom. Even on a good day, I'd be looking for something to happen.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, you like you said, looking back now, right, you can reflect and see how the fear just got out of control, right? It was literally taking you over, it sounds like at that point, and everything was escalating, right? That vicious circle.
yeah, so everything was escalating. I joined lots of forums and I just did everything to try and fix the problem and got completely obsessed with ways of recovering and what I could do to help myself to fix it. And yeah, it was a very difficult time.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happened at this point? So you were off, you had gone to these doctors, you were in a state of high fear, you're researching. What did you do? What kind of treatments did you go through in the beginning, or did you try out?
So I tried various medical treatments. Um, but nothing that ever worked proper, nothing that ever really worked. Gave me a short amount of relief, and I had a lot of hope for them. But actually, I don't think looking back, I really did believe they would work because nothing that I was trying was really making sense to how I felt. One thing, I did have a POTS diagnosis in clinic and as well linked with the long COVID. And I did have some therapy, some tablet therapy for that, which probably was one of the one medical treatment I did find helpful because it just enabled me to be upright and
Yeah.
that improved my mood and then gave me the ability to, um, look into things further. But the main turning point for me in terms of research and medicine was I knew of enough people by 2023 who had got better. There were people around vocalizing that they got better. And I just, one day on a really low day where I felt that it couldn't be worse, I just decided that I was only going to expose myself to people who were better. And that was the first day of the recovery, really. It was a long recovery, but it was the first day, and it was the only turning point that I think made a big
So
difference
you kind of
at
hit the
that in
bottom. That
those
was like
early
your
days.
bottom. That was like your rock bottom.
Yeah.
And you just made this decision to say, okay, there are people recovering. I just need to focus on that. I need to go towards that.
And yeah, so I decided, I made a kind of decision to only expose myself to people who were better. And I started reaching out to them. So there is so much on the internet, there's so much resources that my algorithms and my experience hadn't introduced me to that yet. And months to come, I'd become overwhelmed by how much support there is out there. But in those early days, I didn't know. And what I did see was the odd article in a newspaper or in a journal of someone, a comment saying they'd got better from long COVID. And I reached out to them, or family members did on my behalf, and I just asked how they did it and how they were now. And pretty much everybody I reached out to, no matter if they were, a very high functioning athlete or another person who I'd just seen on a blog, everybody replied to me. And
Mm.
I started to notice themes of the responses I was getting. And people started recommending the odd book, and it snowballed from there. And I didn't look back after that, but it did take me time.
Yeah, let's at this point, let's just say how long it took. So then we'll continue through the process. But like from that point of that realization that you're going to go in this new direction, and here we are now, how long was the process? Just for people listening.
So I got ill in March 2023, and I had this kind of slight light bulb moment, I guess, in October of that year, so 2020, October 2023. And I would say my recovery has been a gradual change at a pace that I could manage from October through to probably exactly a year after that. And I still work on it now. I'm always like, I would consider myself recovered and have done for some time during that time as well, but I'm still always working on it as
Of
well.
course. So just good for the audience to hear that. And I always say now when I work with people, I said, put your timeline out a year and forget about it. And then let's revisit it and see where you are. So you took, a year, right? A little more than a year of this work. And we'll talk about, what you did. But just important for people to understand that everybody wants a quick fix. And it's just not usually the case. It's possible, but it's not typically the case that what I see.
And we always talk about, Jim, in our sessions, we always talked about things that got you stuck. And I think one of the things that got me stuck was thinking it should be quicker than it was, and thinking I was failing because, and these are personality traits that I've now recognized in myself, but seeing it as something to succeed at in those early days. And someone else had read a book and got better, and therefore I was failing that I hadn't. And a big bit of the puzzle for me was dropping those expectations on myself that I didn't have to be the best at recovering. I had to be kind to myself and I had to trust the process. And that was really difficult.
difficult. And what you're alluding to there, everybody, if you hear that, what emotion there is that shame, right? And then moving to self-compassion, like you said, that's the antidote to shame, which is this hard on myself. I'm a failure. I got to work harder. I got to fix this. I'm not good enough. What's wrong with me? Why is it taking so long? Right. So you were able to make that. We talked a lot about that, make that transition into more of that. It's going to take what it's going to take. Right. And like you said, at your pace, you said you moved at your pace, which you did. So maybe start, yeah, start sharing with the audience now what happened. So you hit the bottom. You started seeing, looking for positive stories. You started seeing similar themes, and then what happened after that? What was the next thing that you came across?
So looking back, I can put my recovery into different phases. And the first phase was very much for me education and understanding. Um, Being from a medical background myself, where I'd had quite a different exposure to healthcare, this felt quite different, and it felt like I had to open my mind slightly um, compared to what how I'd practiced previously in work, and I had to detach myself from that. Um, so the first thing I did is I just became so interested. I didn't put any pressure on myself to heal, but I just learned. And I read various books, Sarno's books, Alan Gordon's books, and I just built up evidence that this could be me. And I felt I needed a lot of knowledge about it before I tried it myself.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think you do need that much knowledge before you try it yourself, but I needed to convince myself that
Well, you're a
I was doing the
doctor,
right
right? So
thing.
you want the evidence. And
Yeah.
I think that's always step one. You're highlighting it. Step one, I always tell people is the evidence and what do you have? Let's get the evidence so that you know what you're dealing with, right? So that is your foundation. And then from that point, right, once you realize, okay, this is what I think I have, then you can start to move forward.
After doing that, it felt very straightforward what I needed to do, almost too straightforward and almost too good to be true. And it gave me huge, huge hope, which lifted some of the symptoms, and it really changed, it made my quality of life better just knowing I discovered something which I could do myself that could make me better.
Yeah.
I thought it would be really quick. I thought because I understand this so well, like I really went into the neuroscience of it, neuroplasticity. I became really interested in the science and very medicalized it actually. I thought that I'd be able to nail it because I understood it. Um, and so I did a short course, a brain retraining course, and it got me, from housebound to having the confidence to go outside, but it didn't get me completely better, and that was my expectation. It got me a huge amount of the way into recovery, and it proved to me that it was the right thing, but it didn't get me back to working a full-time job. Running, my
At this
expectations were
point,
very
you
high.
were not working still, right? You were off work, is that right?
I was off work still, yeah. And it got me some of the way, but it didn't get me the whole way. And then I felt like a failure because I'd only partially, instead of seeing that as actually a huge success and some evidence, I had a bit of a dip after that where I felt quite upset that I hadn't done well enough at it. Um, and then I kind of read around more. I watched a lot of recovery stories, and I started to appreciate that there was a big emotional component as well, and a big fear component, shame component. I probably needed to address that as well. And that is when the slow, but very slow, but actual improvement started happening. And that is when I started to gain confidence that not only will I get better from long COVID, but this is something that I need to learn and to know for the rest of my life as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you did that. So you started to get into that. You had done the brain retraining class. You started, and then I can't remember when did we start working together? You somehow reached out to me. I don't exactly remember when that was, but
So we worked together in January 2024. By when we started working together, I was about all coming up to a year into the illness. I'd done a lot of work myself, a lot of the understanding, but I was still stuck on the last bit. I'd planned to go back to work, of which I did in February 2024. I didn't feel ready to, but I just made this decision that I was never going to, and that I was going to get better alongside all the things I wanted to do. And I had seen some recovery videos that you interviews that you had done, and I just needed some support, knowing that getting these symptom flares because I was going back to something that was I was very nervous about was normal, and I needed some external validation at that point because I'd gone so far on my own that I needed the reassurance at that point, and that's when we started working together.
Yeah, I remember that. And you were just starting to get back to go back to work, right? And at the time, I remember the people were there at the hospital or wherever you're working, right? They were still thinking you have long COVID, right? They were still maybe speak to that. They were still addressing it like that because you were on sort of restricted duty, right? And maybe talk a bit about that, how they were like kind of treating you and still almost treating you like as if you had long COVID. And um,
So I was lucky in that my workplace were brilliantly supportive in terms of they knew I had long COVID, and I actually went back to work um, feeling like like I did still have long COVID, and that I couldn't do full duties. It wouldn't be right, and I didn't feel safe at work to do that. So we devised between us a kind of between me and my managers like a graded exercise, a graded exposure back to work over quite a prolonged period of time to be guided by how my symptoms were and my confidence. And I started off the first day I went to work, I went and I got changed into some scrubs. And I said hello to someone, and I think I had a hot chocolate. And then we left. And on the second day, I kind of walked into the environment I work in and stayed for about 5, 10 minutes. And we built up from that over about 8 months to going back to feeling like I was functioning at work. And it could have been faster than that, I'm sure, but I had a lot of anxiety around it, and I it was the speed that I chose to balance with kind of symptom flares that I got during the process. And that is a totally individual thing, but the pace for me felt right, and I was really lucky that my employer supported me at that pace. Um, so that's yeah, mostly.
yeah, and maybe speak to because this I remember we worked together. You were going back, building your hours, but and it's so important to people understand you were not symptom free.
No.
Please speak to that because you were going back through the exposure that we talked a lot about, difficult times, lots of flare-ups. Maybe speak to that process of the exposure training you did.
Yeah, so when I went back to work, I was very clear that I was still struggling with a lot of cognitive symptoms, and my concentration and situational awareness was not good enough for the environment I worked in to practice safely. And I was really well supported over that in terms of I essentially was supernumerary to start with, but I would go into work, and it started off within 5 minutes and then gradually stretched to 3 hours, 6 hours, and I would get that brain fog close down of my kind of awareness at a certain point during the day, and it just increased the longer I did it. It wasn't that I was ever symptom free at work throughout that whole phased return. It just meant that my tolerance, it was all about drip feeding my tolerance and recalibrating how long I could stay there. And I had to stop looking at clocks at work because there was a point where I could get to 3 p.m., but half three wasn't quite possible. And
Right.
it just had to be so slow for me.
Graded exposure. But I
Yeah,
think it's so important for people listening that I remember many, many times you had a lot of strong symptoms and they're challenging and it tested you, it tests everybody where you have to believe, right? That and know that, hey, this is just my brain. This is right. You said protection, this is sensitization, right? Because it's pretty intense at times. You'd come home, right, with headaches, you come home fatigued, exhausted
yeah.
sometimes thinking, I don't know if I can go back, right? I remember the early days. So it really maybe speak to how much it can test the person, your belief and your ability to handle it.
I questioned every single day whether I should be going back to work, whether I could do it. And yeah, as Jim said, I would have severe headaches at work, severe brain fog. I felt like I couldn't listen to what people were saying. I felt I wouldn't notice if an alarm went off around me. Um, it was a huge challenge, and I just remember talking to my partner about it and saying, I'm just going to keep going. I'm just going to keep going in. And eventually, I know from listening to other people that if I just keep going in, this will get easier. And I think I did believe it, but I didn't completely believe it.
Yeah,
And it
that's right.
took months. And this is what I think I maybe needed to hear at the time as well. Like, it was really challenging, and it was a really challenging time. And it did take months. But I got there, and that is okay. It doesn't matter that it took months now because I got there. But in the moment, I needed so much reassurance
Yeah.
that I was doing the right thing. And I required Jim every single time to have the same conversation saying, you need, it's okay to experience these symptoms. You're relearning them. Part of the process is listening to the symptoms and just managing to tolerate it. But it was on the complete edge of what I could tolerate.
Yeah.
I just decided in my head to trust the process, keep going. And
That was it. And I think
yeah,
that's the power when working together for a while is, like I said, just to keep you on track, like to keep you going, because there's plenty of doubt. There's strong symptoms. There's right moments when you're like, I don't know. And I remember we talked a lot about it, and I would, yeah, repeat myself. But you need that, right? You need that encouragement, and also your decision is so powerful, and that's a powerful piece of most people's recovery. When you decide and you say, you know what, I am going back, because that gives you that fortitude, that like gumption to say, yeah, I'm going to go through this. Like I'm going to get through this. That is super powerful. And I kept reinforcing that in you, like, yeah, you're on track. Don't worry. And we talked through, right, some of the reasons why it upticked and some of the emotions and right. We talked a lot more about why you were getting triggered. Maybe speak to that a little bit too about the personality traits and your nature and you know how this triggered you at times at work, but the work you do.
yeah. So I think actually talking a bit about my personality traits, but also about how I process emotions is really important. So I have always been chatty. I've always shared a lot with my friends. I've always seen myself as someone who is very emotionally good at processing things. And this process showed me I really wasn't. I talked a lot about how I felt, but I never, ever, ever let myself feel an emotion. I let myself talk about one superficially, but I never let myself have an uncomfortable feeling of sadness or rage or shame. I would let myself feel anxiety, and and say every single other emotion I felt, I would feel anxious about. So if I was cross with someone, instead of feeling angry about that situation, or I would feel anxious that I was in that situation. And it was a big part of the key over that time was being okay with certain feelings.
Yeah.
And part of the reason I was becoming so triggered in using the example of work, but actually in all aspects of life, was I was so scared of failing that I was because I couldn't tolerate the feeling of shame. I'd never let myself feel shame. So part of the process was actually putting myself in these situations out of my comfort zone and allowing myself to feel shame or anger or a feeling or guilt, a feeling that I'd never let myself feel because it felt so uncomfortable. And I had to learn to feel those things manually. Um, so,
Yes.
for example, failing at something, I would have to almost pick it out of my cognitive brain. That is a situation that I know I am ashamed of. Can I feel ashamed? And then almost drag the emotion up because I knew I was ashamed on a cognitive level, but I couldn't feel it in my body. And I had to start learning how to do that. Like a situation I was cross about, I had to go and lie. I remember one time going and lying on my bedroom floor and saying, like, I'm really cross. I'm going to try and feel angry. And I tried so many times, I just couldn't feel an anger response in my body at all. I felt anxious, I felt sad, I could cry, I could do everything else, but I couldn't feel angry. And eventually, one night, I tried to think about something that made me feel angry, and it just was the most powerful feeling. I actually could only tolerate it for about 3 seconds
Yeah.
when I did feel this emotion in my body. And over time, I managed to feel it for a bit longer. And, I still can't just completely let anger pass through me. Like, it's so intense for me. I don't like, I've never felt strong emotions like that before. And knowing a big part of my recovery was knowing that I could tolerate feeling an emotion.
That's called affect tolerance for everybody listening. And Josie
Mm.
built up, we talked a lot about it and we point back and like some of these feelings, like the shame is such an intense feeling or the anger. And like you're hitting the nail on the head, the ability to move towards those emotions, right, versus away from them is what you started to do. And I saw you evolve in that where you were starting to, I said, let's just feel it. It's just an emotion, right? But I mean, speak to it. It's very scary. It creates the anxiety, like you mentioned, and then that blocks the deeper feelings sometimes. But you did great with that. You kept moving towards those emotions and started to welcome them, right? I remember that you're like, no, I just got to feel this if it's here. But you did a lot of work on that. And I think people will take a lot from that because a lot of people are in the same boat as you, where you're the happy-go-lucky person. You're right, really a nice person, a pleaser, but you don't get angry so much, or you don't want to feel the shame. But there was so much power in doing that over time, right? Maybe speak now how you feel about these emotions versus how you were before.
So I still catch myself not wanting to feel them, but I'm aware of it, and awareness is the first thing. So I'm going to say I'm not perfect,
Of
but
course not.
what I do is it's hugely, you said power, that it is so empowering, and nothing gives you reassurance that you're going to be okay more than knowing you can tolerate feeling bad. And so, I use, people pleasing, for example. If I know I can tolerate someone being upset with me, then I'm less anxious in that situation. Or if I know I can tolerate failing at something, then I'm more likely to give it a go, and I'm more confident because I know I can tolerate if it doesn't go well. So it's completely life changing to be able to sit with emotions that you've always been too scared to feel. And that has been, you know, long COVID symptoms aside, regardless of how what my background was, what was going on, that has been the biggest thing that I would take forward, is knowing that whatever bad thing comes your way, I can be okay with it because I can feel bad feelings. As I don't think I've ever let myself feel a bad feeling until the last couple of years.
Mm.
And you can't avoid having that in life.
That's right. You can't, you try to avoid, right? But it gets you. So, but that's such a powerful statement. And I think that's like the deeper learning, like you said, that's come out of this is learning to be with your emotions and right. Because we talked about that too, how your nature is just be a real kind, a pleaser, right? And you can use that to avoid how you feel, right? Or because you feel anxious, you want to please because you deeper down, like you said, you don't want to feel the failure or the judgment or less than, which is the shame. But you started to say, you know what? If that shame comes, I will feel it. And then that removes the anxiety. Then it allows you to drop some of your people pleasing, which I saw you started to do. You really started to, right, become more assertive. I remember that was part of your thing too, right? Speaking up more or um, maybe speak to that a little bit more, how you started to try to share your feelings a little more honestly, directly, and not hide or code it over with the people pleasing.
Yeah, so I tried to practice, and I haven't changed personality huge. I haven't had this huge personality change, but I will say things if I feel I need to. And I still do get a reaction to that. I get anxious after I say something, but I'm okay with it. And I think it's about being okay with how you feel after doing something that goes against the grain, that helps you change.
Yeah.
And that's been a big learning curve for me. And noticing certain behaviors that I had, people pleasing, being really hard on myself, not wanting to let anyone down. Actually, I didn't necessarily feel I needed to do all of those things, but I was just so scared of the feeling afterwards, of how the guilt afterwards. And that's really what we needed to work on. And I'd say, yeah, that was a big portion of the kind of meaty bit of my recovery that took a lot of work. Um,
Yeah, it did. And you just had a big point there. It's the emotions that drive the behaviors. Like you had to get to the guilt and the shame because, and once you're able to feel those, that softens your behaviors, right? Because we're behaving off these emotions. So your willingness to go to these emotions, and that was massive. And I saw you go towards it more. You did an amazing job with that. And again, still, it's good. It's work in progress, right? Because it's not your nature. And that's true for me too. And that's true for a lot of people. But I think what you're showing is you don't need to be perfect at it. You just need to be willing, right? To feel these and know that you're going to get through them and they're not going to kill you. You're not going to die or be obliterated or, right, think something bad's going to happen to you.
and actually, learning to feel the sensations of emotions meant I could also, because the emotions were so much more severe than the symptoms actually, meant that the symptoms, I could, my tolerance to them went up as was brilliant as well. I just said, oh, I've got brain fog, I don't mind. Like I feel like I can barely see. Oh, it's fine, it'll pass, it'll pass. And I managed to increase my tolerance so well that actually the fear went away. And then I stopped the hypervigilance, I stopped being scared of my symptoms. I knew that there'd be a good day again. And the whole thing, just over months, I'm not going to make this sound quick, over months just de-escalated. And the fear just, I just chipped away at that fear. And just some days I would obviously still go back and feel scared and in that original place. But overall, I just managed to bring my fear levels down, increase my tolerance, and everything just slipped away so gradually. There was no light bulb, there was no kind of huge moment where I woke up and I was better and I was able to run a half marathon. It was all very graded for me. And it kind of my exposure to things went up as my symptom levels went down. And I can't, that's why it's very hard to give exact timings because it was just such a gradual process.
That's right. And that's the most typical result we see. And so that's good for people to hear. It's almost so gradual that you can't put a timeline on it. You can't even say, oh, this moment. It's just like a up and down, but gradually getting better. But one thing I do want to speak to that you alluded to is that, and I remember this, you got in the right mindset. You had a really nice attitude, the way you handled it. You're like, oh, it's gonna go better. It's gonna go away. Like you handled it really well with that sort of lightness and that bit of optimism. Even if it was hard, you didn't go into the secondary reactions as much. You started to shift into this, yeah, okay, I'll get through this. Yeah, it kind of sucked, but it's all right. You were able to cope with it in a good way.
I think I did that by listening to other people. I just kept drip feeding myself hope the whole time. I knew that hope was a big part of this. And a big part of my initial fear was the potential narrative that this was incurable, that this was an incurable illness, or there was nothing I could do about it. And I think as soon as I saw there was something I could do about it, and that there was people who'd recovered, there was hope. And it's hope doesn't last that long. It only takes another knock, and then you feel hopeless again. And I just drip fed myself constantly. And luckily, YouTube is full of this. I watched 5 recovery stories a day. I spent my whole story, when I really needed that at the beginning. And then, as I was getting better, I was still watching someone talking about them being better at least once a week, maybe twice a week, right till almost recently, I had to keep drip feeding myself that reminder that
Yeah.
it was possible. Um, and that is why I want to share my story as well. And stories come in all different shapes and forms. To start with, I had to pick someone who'd got recovered from long COVID because that was the only thing I could identify with. And I could only compare myself to someone with exactly the same symptoms as me. And it was so specific. I had to watch people with brain who'd recovered from brain fog with long COVID because, that was the worst symptom because that was my worst symptom. But as I kind of understood more, I could watch actually any, neuroplastic recovery, any of these inspiring recovery stories and apply it to myself because the principles were all very similar. And even now, every so often, like I am trying to move on from the identity of having had long COVID, because I think that's a big part, and I don't mention it to people. And one of the huge endpoints of my recovery is to just never mention that I'd had, to not mention that I had it. Um,
Yeah.
not because not because I mind people knowing, like I'm very happy to speak about it, but just because I just needed people not to treat me in that way anymore, for myself to move on.
Yeah, that's
And
really
I feel
important.
now so much further past long COVID that actually I feel I can speak again about it now. But there was a very vulnerable couple of months where I knew I was recovered, but I wasn't quite confident in myself that if someone didn't say, "Oh, you look really tired, do you need to sit down?" from the goodness of their heart, that wouldn't cause some doubt for me. So I had to really, really, really set boundaries on what I chose to listen to
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah, I remember that. That was amazing too. You didn't let that in. You didn't associate with it anymore, right? And that was a big part of moving away from that diagnosis that that's what I have, or because again, it can make you vulnerable, right? It could get in you and start doubting again. So you really did that. And so you, just for listeners, so you started, we worked and you were getting back to work more and more hours, and maybe take people through up towards the last bit there. What was happening? You'd gotten back to work some more hours, and then what happened?
I started to try and challenge myself and go really out of my comfort zone and play around. Actually, I'd gained enough, and I would never in my early days recovered. If I watched someone say this on a video, I would have thought this was so out of my reach. But I started just to see how far I could manage to push myself, in a kind of compassionate way. It was a different. I've always pushed myself. That was part of the problem. But I decided to try and do it in a really compassionate way and a curious way. Like, what can like, can I do this? And I decided to try and take some quite difficult professional exams. Was seeing as my fatigue was very cognitive, that felt like a really big challenge, and probably the equivalent of a marathon if you had very physical fatigue. So I decided to do that, which I've worked for and sat recently. And one of the things about illness was I'd always worried about starting a family and whether I'd ever been well enough. And I'm now a week or two away from my due date, first baby. So,
Amazing.
it's been, and having the confidence to know that I was healed enough to go through a pregnancy journey and look after a baby felt like a big leap of faith at the time, but it's been brilliant, and I've been really well, and I feel so optimistic about the future. And I wanted to say that because I definitely was looking for people who'd had similar success stories, with pregnancy as well afterwards. So yeah, and then back at work, just feeling like I can say yes to things, feeling confident in my ability, feeling like a valued member of the workplace. Because there was a lot of shame and guilt when I was ill that I wasn't pulling my weight in a very busy workplace, that, you know, I I should be functioning higher, I should be taking on more responsibility. And now feeling really, really, almost, it's hard to describe the emotion, like really proud's the wrong word, but just grateful to myself, I think, that I took the time to learn this, to actually really sort out how I process my emotions, enter, get knowledge that I needed to be in the right mindset. I now feel that I can take on a lot more than I could before, and I'm healthier than I was before.
Hmm. Yeah, you are. You're more resilient, right? You're,
Mm.
like you said earlier, empowered. Do you feel more empowered? And
Yeah, definitely more empowered. And I think a lot of it, in the early days of recovery, which I've seen other people speak about a lot as well, is what if it happens again? What if it happens again? And I, I will probably get another neuroplastic symptom, stress-induced symptom in my life. I probably will, but I'm not worried about it. In fact, actually, but an interesting thing and part of what turned out to be evidence of why I decided to um, use this approach to help with long COVID was that actually I had quite a lot of symptoms in life before. I just didn't know. I just didn't recognize them. So I know that they will, I know they'll come again. They do for many of us. But I don't feel worried about that anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, that's massive. That's just massive, right? Big difference versus that terror and fear you had when you got these symptoms, right? Now it's completely different. And that you're right about that. We all can have symptoms, but your ability and how you cope with it and deal with it is everything. It can go away quick. It doesn't need to become a chronic long COVID or any chronic symptom, right? And I think you feel confident in that now, right?
Yeah, like one in the early, just in the early days when I was lying on my floor trying to just eke out an emotion and see if I could feel it, I felt 1 or 2 seconds of an emotion, and then the emotion went, and I had the most excruciating pain in my neck. I panic emailed Jim, and it lasted a week, and I knew exactly what it was, and I was almost like, ah, it almost became laughable, and it went, and it. I've learned so much, but it took. I think my main take-home point is it took a really long time,
Yeah.
um, and it wasn't easy. I felt I had to tolerate a lot and be okay with not feeling good for
Okay.
a lot of
Yeah.
it as well.
Being okay with not feeling okay and patience, like you said, and which means self-compassion, which it's almost forces you to do that, right? You couldn't have forced this, right? You had to just, I think that's what happens to people. You try to fix it, you try to force it, and you realize it doesn't work. And eventually you got into this right approach, which is the compassion, the patience, the kindness, the willingness to feel your emotions. Let's just go forward one day at a time, right? And you got in the right attitude. And that was like the right state to get into, right? That allowed you to get through this.
Yeah, I think that is, I never realized that when I first had these symptoms of long COVID, that this is where it would go. Um, but it felt really right for me. It made sense to me for my symptoms. And once I started, although it was really difficult, it felt natural to keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you
Um,
didn't give up. Once you were you were all in. I think that was also really important. Like you kept coming back. We kept doing some sessions. We spread them out further as you get better, but you never gave up. At that point, once you're on it, you're like, I'm on the train and we're gonna get there. And that's it. I think that's maybe speak to that just a little bit because people can lose hope or they give up maybe too soon, right? Or they're like partway through the process and they go, oh, I don't think this is working for me.
yeah, so I could have given up many times, and complete many times. And you see people who've managed to do it really quickly. And I hugely compared myself to those people with those people. I All I can say is just really exaggerated my experience. It was slow. It there was no particular one source that helped. There was no one particular attitude of someone which helped. I had to have input from lots and lots of different books, YouTube videos, recovery stories, and I needed facilitation with Jim to put that all together. Each different resource I used was, a hundredth of the puzzle, and I had to keep reading and keep immersing myself in information to keep drip feeding the right information I needed for things to start clicking. So essentially I just had to keep going. And the only mantra that I could use, which would get me through this, was just trust the process. It's a process. And almost just take a step back and say, I've decided to do this and I'm not going to think too hard about it. I'm just going to keep going. And I initially had so many deadlines in my head. I thought, oh, I'll be better by Christmas. I'll be better. I'll go back to work and then I'll make sure I'm back on full duties by 2 months within going back to work because that seems reasonable. And eventually, I just stopped doing that. I think I just missed so many of these false deadlines I made myself that became pointless anyway. And Jim was very good at saying extend the timeline. But I didn't want to be better in a year's time. If he told me in October this will take a year, I would be like, that's ages. I don't want that. Um, but but the process of getting better, seeing the improvement, actually meant waiting and it taking a year wasn't as bad as I would have thought it would have been because I knew I was going to get there. And it doesn't matter how long it takes, as long as you know you're going to get there. And that's the only way I could get through it.
Yeah, and that last bit, and we'll finish up in a moment, but knowing I'm going to get there, like trusting the process. There was a time in the beginning you maybe weren't sure, right? You were going to get there, but as the as you kept sticking with the process, there was a deeper knowing at some point that you were going to get there, right? That started to come in.
I there was a lot of doubt, but the longer it went on and the more people I heard of getting better, and the more trust I had in myself, I think it ends up when you start this process, you start borrowing trust from other people, borrowing hope from other people on their recovery stories. But actually, the further you go through it, you see little gains yourself, and you start. It's confidence. You start to have some confidence in yourself, and the evidence that you get from your own recovery is just exponentially better than anything you can get from anyone else. You need everyone else. You need the recovery stories at the start, and you need them to drip feed you, be fed to you when, on a day where you can't do it for yourself. But the longer you go through it, the more confidence and appreciation you have that actually I'm doing this. I may not be 100, if I know I don't like using a scale, but I may not be exactly the end goal, but whenever are we? And just knowing that you're better than you were a month ago, and you're moving forward, it doesn't matter it stopped mattering how fast I move forward as long as I knew I was. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah. And
So
it's
well
just like
said.
even yeah, a few months in, even though I wasn't better, I was probably still, actually functionally not doing anywhere near as much as I would have hoped. I didn't care because I knew that the movement was in the right direction and it kind of became enjoyable at that point. I was still having symptoms, almost addictive and an enjoyable process. Like it felt for the first time like I was doing something so good for my health, so good for my life, that I just wanted to enjoy the process by the end of it, which is quite a nauseating thing to say because I would not have said that before. Um,
Yeah, that
yeah.
and the end you hit the nail on the head, and that's what I said earlier. Your attitude, the way you approached it, exactly what you said. You started just to enjoy the process and just take the process, take all the pressure off, remove the timeline, and that just accelerates the healing even more, right? But yeah, you were just in this really good state. I saw you. There was still struggles, there were still hard times, but your way you handled it was so beautiful, and you got into that really nice state. And I think that really catapulted you forward, it's so paradoxical sometimes this process, we want to get better so bad. The desperation, the striving, the fixing it, right? It just doesn't work. It sets people back.
And at some point, the desperation switched to excitement of, even though I wasn't better, of how amazing will I feel if I've done this for myself? And I just kept thinking of that feeling that what if it was me who became one of those people who did recover, like that I've watched in the videos so many times? Like, what if that was me? And that, I mean, I get excited thinking about it now. Like that just became the most exciting feeling. Like, there's nothing better than adding things into your life than taking them, as we all know, taking, when you spend such a long period of time taking things away from your life. And, but time, it needed time.
It needed time, yeah. And that excitement, yeah. Then that's the thing. I always tell people if you can put yourself out there and visualize the success story, you're going to be one and get excited about that and see that. That's like your guidepost, it's your shining light. It's like your something to look forward to, right? And eventually you got into that and the ball got rolling in the right direction. And it's an amazing story. It's just an amazing story. And as we finish up, is there anything you want to share with the audience out there? Last words of wisdom or what you want to let people know?
Um, I want to think carefully about this because I was given so much wisdom. I think we've covered a lot about timelines, and it's okay for it to take some time. And I think for me that was the most important thing. But I think just know it's okay to feel some symptoms. Know it's okay that during the process it isn't all rosy, and you feel some symptoms during it, and that's okay, and that's actually good because you're feeling them in the right way. You're reprocessing them. It'll pass. It always passes. That is, yeah.
That's right. It
And
always
just trust it. Just trust it. Just keep going.
Yeah, so beautifully said, and I'm so happy for you. You're having a baby soon. It's just amazing to see where you were to where you are now. So I'm so excited for you, and it's I can't wait. You're gonna have to send me some pictures when the baby comes.
I'll let you know.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for being here, Josie. It's a great story, and I so appreciate you coming on and sharing it.
No problem. Yeah. And yeah, good luck everyone with their recovery.